Imagine, if you will, like every imaginary friend you ever created as a child. I mean, really take a second to picture them.
Oh, that's a heavy thing to ask right off the bat.
Right. But just think about it. Every invisible companion you whispered secrets to in the backyard when you felt like, nobody else understood you.
Yeah, or every single monster you tamed under your bed so you could finally fall asleep without being terrified.
Exactly. Every winged creature or superhero you conjured up company staring out the window on a long, boring car ride. Now, I want you to imagine that they didn't just vanish when you grew up.
Which is, how we usually think of it. They just fade away into the background.
Right. Imagine they didn't just quietly fade into the recesses of your memory when you went to middle school or had your first heartbreak or got your first job. Imagine that the exact moment you stopped needing them, they were left behind as living, breathing, sentient.
Physically real, just taking up space.
Yes, physically real, just wandering the streets of your city completely alone.
It is a profoundly unsettling thought experiment when you really sit with it. You're talking about a scenario where the temporary coping mechanisms of our youth are suddenly burdened with physical permanence.
Unsettling is definitely the word for it.
Because we, as children, we create them to solve a very specific, fleeting, emotional problem, right? But then they are cursed with a biological reality that completely outlasts their purpose. They are left to navigate a world that no longer requires their services.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the jump, because that is the exact premise we are exploring today on our deep dive. If you've been following along, you might know our topic.
We have some incredible source material to go through today.
We really do. We are looking at comprehensive retrospectives on the highly awarded animated series, Foster's Home for Imaginary, and specifically, we're doing a deep character study of its protagonist, Bloo.
And, if you remember this show from back in the day, your brain probably just jumps to vibrant colors, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Vibrant colors, chaotic comedy, whimsical character design.
But the mission of our conversation today isn't just to casually recap an old cartoon. We are going to treat this universe with the gravity it actually deserves.
Absolutely. We are going to analyze the surprising, sometimes terrifying psychological depth hiding in plain sight within this world. We're going to talk about the trauma of abandonment.
And the suffocating weight of what psychologists might call biological determinism.
Yes, and the incredibly complex, often exploitative ecosystem of a world where human imagination becomes a permanent physical reality.
What's truly fascinating here is the core paradox that serves as the foundation for this entire universe. On the surface, the institution at the center of this world, Foster's, is pitched to the public as a wonderful imagination habitation.
I love that branding. Wonderful.
It's brilliant marketing. It's branded as this colorful, whimsical Victorian mansion filled with endless joy and creativity. But if you look closely at the architecture of the premise, its entire foundation is built on a deeply tragic reality.
Right, because Foster's is, by definition, an institution designed entirely to manage the societal fallout of human maturation.
Exactly. The only reason this magical mansion exists is because children routinely discard their sentient companion. It is a brightly colored utopian solution to a fundamentally melancholic problem.
I'm so glad you brought up the institutional aspect, because the analogy that immediately comes to my mind when looking at this world is, well, an emotional animal shelter.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Think about how we view animal adoption in the real world. Family adopts a pup because it's cute and the kids want it, but then the dog grows up, it requires actual work, maybe the family moves, or they just decide they don't have the time anymore.
And the living, breathing creature ends up in a concrete shelter.
Yes. And in the world of this show, children are essentially conjuring these beings out of thin air to fulfill a highly specific emotion. But what happens to a good idea when the creator's brain matures and no longer needs that dopamine hit or that comfort?
They just drop them off at a whimsical orphanage. And that orphanage is run by a very specific trio of characters, which we'll dive into later.
Right, Madam Foster, Mr. Harriman, and Frankie.
Exactly. And they offer a promise to the world, which is that good ideas are not forgotten. But the underlying anxiety that permeates every single hallway of that mansion is that they are forgotten.
Forgotten by the creators who mattered most.
Yep. And every single resident inside knows.
So, to really understand the psychology of this world, and specifically the psychology of our main subject, Bloo, we can't just look at the funny antics. We have to start at ground zero.
We have to look at the exact moment of separation.
Exactly. We need to examine the moment an imaginary friend is forced out of their home, and the very specific, highly stressful legal loophole that sets our entire story in motion.
The catalyst of creation and separation. So let's look at the origin story. We have an 8-year-old boy named Mac and his imaginary friend, Blue.
And if you, listening right now, have never seen Blue, picture the absolute simplest design possible. He's literally a round, blue, domed cylinder. He looks like a little blue ghost or a blob.
But his origin is deeply rooted in infant psychology.
Yeah.
Mac created Blue shortly after his 3rd birthday for a very, very specific reason. Mac's mother took away his favorite comfort blanket.
Oh, wow. So he was a direct replacement.
Precisely. Blue was quite literally manifested by a toddler's brain to be a replacement security blanket, which immediately establishes Blue's core identity, his very reason for drawing breath.
That puts so much pressure on him from day one.
It does. If we look at Winnicott's theory of transitional objects in child psychology, the teddy bears, the blankets, these objects are absolutely crucial. They allow a child to transition from depending entirely on the mother to finding comfort in the outside world.
So Blue isn't just a plaything. His biological imperative is to be that transitional object. He is designed to provide emotional security to Mac.
Right. And they spend 5 years being absolutely inseparable. But then time marches on. Mac turns 8.
And 8 years old, at least in the context of this specific family, is the socially mandated deadline for child. Mac's older brother, Terrence, is just a relentless bully.
He's awful. He constantly torments Mac for still hanging on to an imaginary friend.
The family dynamic is a complete war zone of constant physical and verbal fighting, mostly instigated by Terrence just to get Blue in trouble. Finally, Mac's mom reaches her breaking.
She pulls Mac into the kitchen and delivers the devastating news. She says Terrence is a bully, but he's ultimately right. Mac is too old. He has outgrown Blue, and he needs to get rid of him.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Blue's character development, this kitchen conversation is the primal trauma that dictates everything he does for the rest of his life.
Because Blue isn't oblivious. He is actively eavesdropping on this conversation.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking.
It really is. He is standing just outside the door listening to the very person he was created to comfort, being told by an authority figure that he, Blue, is a nuisance, that he is a problem to be discarded.
I mean, think about how devastating that would be for you, the listener. Imagine if your entire existence was tied to one job, one purpose, and you overhear your boss saying, "We don't need you anymore, you're a liability."
But it's not a job, it's your family. You are being evicted from your own existence.
So Blue, in a moment that is equal parts desperation and selflessness, actually takes the initiative. He sees a late-night TV ad for Foster's Home for imaginary friends.
He sees this mansion where friends can live when kids outgrow them, and, crucially, where kids are allowed to come visit.
So they go. They meet Mr. Harriman, they go through the intake process, and they sign Blue up as a resident. But here is where the trap snaps shut. This is where the horror of the premise really kicks in.
Foster's isn't a free hotel. It's an adoption aid.
Exactly. The moment Blue's name goes into that ledger, he is legally available to be taken away forever by any random child who walks through the front door.
And the only way around this looming threat of adoption is a massive, unprecedented commitment that Mr. Harriman offers them. Mac can prevent Blue from being adopted, but only if he physically visits Blue every single day at exactly 3:00 p.m.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. I want you to really think about the sheer crushing pressure of that 3 p.m. We are talking about an 8-year-old boy.
It's a huge burden for a kid.
It's insane. Mac is literally scheduling his childhood innocence on a daily, inflexible, bureaucratic deadline. Every single day, he has to hear the school bell ring and immediately sprint across town to this mansion to prevent his best friend from being handed over to a stranger.
It is an incredible physical manifestation of a child refusing to let go of their innocence. We all have that moment where we transition away from childhood. Maybe you stop playing with action figures or you pack up your dolls.
Right, but usually it's a slow, natural, almost unnoticeable fade.
Exactly. For Mac, it is a daily contracted obligation. He is battling the natural progression of time and maturation every single afternoon at 3:00 p.m.
And the immediate threat of failing this contract is very real, because on Blue's very first morning at the house, a spoiled, aggressive, rich girl arrives looking for a new toy, and she spots Blue.
And the entire house goes into a full-blown panic. The other friends, who we will talk about later, like Wilt, Eduardo, and Coco, they recognize the danger and try to physically hide Blue inside trash cans and behind curtains.
But the girl catches him, and right at the last possible agonizing second, right as she's walking out the door with him, Mac bursts through the front gates to rescue him, fulfilling his 3 p.m. quota.
But it doesn't end there. because escaping adoption creates a ripple effect of resentment within the house.
Oh, we have to talk about Duchess. She is fat.
She really is. There's another imaginary friend living there named Duchess. She's this Cubist, Picasso-looking entity who is incredibly bitter and high maintenance.
She is furious that this spoiled rich girl wanted a simple blue blob instead of her.
Duchess represents the dark side of the orphanage dynamic. She feels the home is beneath her. She views herself as high art, as superior. So to be passed over for adoption in favor of a simplistic, newly arrived blob is a deep narcissistic injury to her.
She is deeply insulted. So what does she do? She seeks out an alliance with the one person who hates Bloo as much as she does. Terrence, Mac's bullying older brother.
Terrence is already furious that Mac found a loophole and didn't actually suffer the pain of getting rid of Bloo permanently. So a pact forms between the human bully and the rejected, resentful imaginary friend.
And their plan is brutally dark. You think of cartoons as slapstick, but their plan is essentially premeditated murder.
It really is an escalation.
Terrence tricks Mac, physically locks him inside a closet at their house, and then goes to Foster's pretending to be a reformed, good kid who wants to adopt Bloo himself.
Meanwhile, Duchess distracts the rest of the house by letting an incredibly dangerous, evil, imaginary friend loose in the foyer.
And they actually pull it off. Terrence and Duchess successfully kidnap Bloo, throw him in a sack, and take him to a junkyard. Their ultimate goal is to literally feed Bloo to a massive, terrifying monster that lives in the trash called an extramecharosaurus.
It is an extreme escalation, certainly played for stakes in a narrative sense, but it highlights a fundamental truth of this world. Imaginary friends are completely, entirely vulnerable.
They have no legal rights whatsoever.
None. They have no physical agency outside the walls of the mansion. They are entirely at the mercy of human whims, human cruelty, and the resentments of their institutionalized peers.
Mac eventually manages to escape his closet using these colorful plastic eggs that Coco, the bird plant friend, laid in his backpack, and he rushes to the junkyard with the other friends to save Bloo.
They manage to confuse the extramecharosaurus, which ends up eating Terrence and Duchess instead.
I should probably note, it just throws them back up a few minutes later, so we aren't dealing with actual digestion, thankfully.
It's still a cartoon.
But the aftermath of this whole incredibly traumatic ordeal is what changes the rules of the universe. Madame Foster herself steps. She witnesses Mac's sheer, unyielding dedication to this blue blob, and she makes an unprecedented, permanent.
Bloo can live at Foster's, and he will never be put up for adoption. He is permanently off the market, given a VIP status, as long as Mac keeps visiting at 3 p.m.
But this raises a vital psychological question, doesn't it? I mean, Madame Foster's ruling is framed narratively as a joyous, triumphant, happy ending. But is it really?
That's the big debate. By guaranteeing that Bloo is always there, waiting in a protected vault, is Foster's acting as a necessary, compassionate safety net? Or are they actively enabling Mac's refusal to mature?
Wait, I completely agree with you. I want to push back on Madame Foster's benevolence here, because doesn't this ultimately stunt Mac's emotional growth?
It certainly institutionalizes his childhood comfort object, so he never have to actually do the hard work of letting it go.
Think about it. If you are struggling with anxiety and your therapist says, here is a magic pill that instantly makes it go away, and you can have it exactly at 3 p.m. every day, you never actually learn the cognitive tool.
You just become dependent on the 3 p.m. pill. Madame Foster is treating the symptom, not the disease of growing up.
And on the flip side, let's look at what this means for Bloo. Yes, he has VIP status. He's technically safe from the adoption floor. But what if Mac misses a day?
That's the terrifying variable.
What if Mac gets a terrible case of the flu and can't leave bed? What if there's a blizzard? What if Mac's mom grounds? The constant underlying existential anxiety of that 3 p.m. deadline doesn't magically vanish. It becomes the ticking clock's life.
Precisely. You have perfectly articulated the breeding ground for complex trauma. The fear of eviction from his human home, the trauma of nearly being consumed by a monster in a junkyard.
Not to mention the profound internalized knowledge that his original human family viewed him as garbage to be thrown away.
Yes, that fundamentally rewires Bloo's brain. He may have a permanent bed in a Victorian mansion, but psychologically, his survival is always contingent.
He is always exactly one missed 3 p.m. visit away from non-existence.
And that underlying terror brings us to how this trauma actually manifests in his day-to-day behavior.
Which is to say, if you watch the show, he acts like a total, irredeemable narcissist. He is loud, he is selfish, he breaks rules, he demands attention.
But once you understand the origin story we just discussed, you realize it's a very specific, deeply sad kind of narcissism.
It's a defense mechanism, plain and simple. Let's look at an event that perfectly illustrates an episode simply called Busted.
In Busted, we observe the immediate psychological aftermath of Bloo's near-death experience in the junkyard. Mr. Harriman, the strict rabbit who runs the day-to-day operations, is constantly bossing Blue around.
But Harriman makes a very specific, targeted threat here.
He tells Blue that by having VIP unadoptable status, Blue is already breaking the fundamental rule of the house. Therefore, if Blue breaks even one more rule, VIP status or not, he will be kicked out onto the street.
Which, as an adult looking at this, is such a needlessly cruel thing to say to someone who barely survived being thrown away by his family.
It's astonishingly callous. So Blue, absolutely terrified, decides his best strategy for survival is to literally freeze.
He vows to stand in the exact same position all day long to guarantee he doesn't accidentally break a rule.
But of course, Blue is a ball of nervous kinetic energy. He can't stay still. He starts ranting to his friends, pacing around the room wildly, gesticulating.
Then he accidentally knocks over a clay statue of Madame Foster. It shatters into a million pieces on the floor.
Now, analyze the reaction to this mistake. It's where the trauma becomes glaringly visible. A well-adjusted individual or well-adjusted imaginary friend might gasp, feel guilty, and go apologize to Madame Foster or Frankie.
They would expect a scolding, maybe a punishment.
But Blue goes into sheer apocalyptic panic. He orchestrates absurd, incredibly elaborate cover-ups because his brain equates breaking a statue with literal death on the streets.
He and his friends go so far as to convince the real elderly Madame Foster to cover herself in clay, stand on the pedestal, and physically pose as the statue just to feel Mr. Harriman.
It's played for laughs, obviously. The physical comedy of this old woman pretending to be clay is funny.
But underneath the engine driving the comedy is absolute terror. He is entirely convinced that a single broken piece of pottery will result in his immediate eviction.
And the heartbreaking part is, he's proven partially right to be paranoid. When Mr. Harriman finally catches them in the lie and threatens him, Harriman suddenly reveals, completely nonchalantly, that he actually has dozens of backup statues in a closet because they break all the time.
The rule wasn't even a big deal.
Exactly. But the emotional damage to Blue's nervous system is already done. He realizes the authority figures are capricious. He lives in a state of constant hypervigilance.
And if we track the progression of that hypervigilance, we see it morph into a desperate, insatiable need to be seen and validated.
Right. If his position in the house is precarious, he must make himself undeniable. We see this psychological adaptation play out on a massive scale in the episode Blues Brothers.
The inciting incident for this one is simple. Mac takes Blue to his human elementary school for show and tell.
Oh, this sequence of events is rough to analyze.
It really is. So Blue goes to human school, and for the first time, he is in his absolute element. He's in front of an audience.
He is lapping up the attention, doing physical comedy, making fart noises, and the kids absolutely devour it. They think he's the coolest, funniest thing they have ever seen.
The validation is intoxicating. Mac's teacher is so impressed with how Blue engaged the class that she actually gives Mac and Blue VIP tickets to a highly coveted event called the Ice Shade as a reward for spreading awareness about imaginary friends.
Predictably, Blue's fragile ego inflates dramatically. He goes back to Foster's and immediately begins gloating to all his friends, especially Eduardo, who desperately wanted to go to the Ice Shade.
Blue becomes absolutely insufferable. He is drunk on the sudden rush of validation from Mac's human class.
But the universe of Foster's rarely lets an ego go unchecked. The very next day, the consequence of that validation arrives directly at the front.
A kid from Mac's class shows up at Foster's and rings the doorbell. And what is he holding in his hands? He's holding a slightly off-brand, slightly misshapen knockoff version of Blue.
The kid explains to Frankie that he thought Blue was so cool at show and tell that he went home and imagined his own version.
But, as kids do, the novelty wore off in less than 24 hours. He doesn't want it. And he just unceremoniously hands this clone over to the orphan, walks away.
And it does not stop with one kid. Over the next few hours, kid after kid from that classroom shows up at the door.
Each one drops off a different, slightly varied, slightly flawed copy, endless versions of himself, created on a whim, and then immediately discarded by children who simply got bored of them after a single after.
I really want you, the listener, to put yourself in Blue's non-existent shoes for a sec. Think about what this means for his psyche.
It was bad enough that he was almost thrown away by Mac's mom because he was deemed a nuisance. But now, he has to sit in the foyer of this house and watch, on repeat, literal clones of himself being tossed away like hot garbage.
Every time the doorbell rings, another human child says, "I'm bored of this. It's broken. There's something wrong with him."
He is being forced to watch the physical manifestation of his own ultimate disposability. It is a profound existential nightmare.
How does an ego-driven entity cope with seeing his own face mass-produced and deemed worthless? He leans entirely into his defense mechanism.
Instead of breaking down and crying, which would require vulnerability, he attempts to assert dominance.
He forms the clones into an army. He embraces the sheer chaos of it all. commanding these dozens of knockoffs to take over the mansion, making them sing the Ice Shades theme song in 100-part harmony.
He tries to control the terrifying situation by crowning himself their undisputed leader. It's the ultimate fake it till you make its response to trauma.
But the reality check that follows is just brutal. Mac arrives at 3 p.m., and Mac, his best friend, his creator, his soulmate, can't even tell which Bloo is the real.
Mac is just staring at a sea of blue blobs, completely lost.
And when it's finally time to go to the Ice Shades event, they discover the show is fruit-themed. The producers need a blueberry.
So all the clone Blues realize their similarity. They physically combine their bodies to form one giant blueberry, and they go skate in the show.
They get all the glory, the applause, the spotlight, while the real Bloo, the original, is forced to sit in the cold bleachers and watch cheap copies of himself get the validation he so desperately craves.
It is a harsh, sobering lesson in his lack of. He is not special. He is easily replicated.
But the true test of Bloo's fragile sense of self-worth comes not from cheap copies of himself, but from a completely new original creation. This dynamic is explored in the episode Mac Dad, which introduces one of the most infamous characters in the show's run, Cheese.
Oh man, Cheese. If you know this show, you know Cheese.
The picture painted of this guy is just vivid and chaotic.
One morning, Mac wakes up in his human house in his own bed and finds a brand new, yellow, strange-looking imaginary friend sleeping right next.
Mac takes him to Foster's to figure out what's going on, and this guy is just bizarre. He is dim-witted to the extreme.
He is severely lactose intolerant, but he constantly aggressively screams for chocolate milk. He operates on pure, chaotic toddler logic.
When Bloo meets him, Bloo tries to be somewhat hospitable and gives him chocolate milk, which immediately results in a mess. Mac has to step in.
Mac has to clean up Cheese, care for him, wipe his face, and then Mac sits Bloo and tries to explain that he thinks Cheese is actually his new imaginary friend. He frames it to Bloo as his baby brother.
You can imagine the psychological fallout of those words. Bloo's jealousy doesn't just spike, it skyrockets to dangerous levels.
He demands, with genuine hurt in his voice, to know why Mac would ever imagine.
Mac tries to explain the unconscious nature of imagination, that he didn't sit down and plan to make cheese, that it just sort of happened spontaneously overnight.
But for Bloo, intent doesn't matter. This is the ultimate betrayal because, as we established earlier, Bloo's entire biological imperative, his sole foundational reason for existing in the universe, is to be Mac's one and only best friend.
Right. If Mac has a new best friend, a new baby brother, what is Bloo's purpose becomes obvious.
I have to offer a real-world analogy here because we see this in human psychology all the time. It's like the classic dynamic of a firstborn child dealing with a new infant coming to hospital.
Oh, exactly.
The firstborn is used to having 100% of the parent's attention, 100% of. Suddenly, there's this loud, messy, demanding, entirely helpless thing taking up all the oxygen in the room.
The firstborn often acts out, regresses, or gets angry. But for Bloo, that standard human sibling rivalry is amplified by a million.
A human firstborn child still has an independent biological essence. They still have a body that exists regardless of their parent. Bloo is his relationship.
His literal atoms were formed by Mac's affection. Without that exclusivity, he has no identity. He is nothing but empty air.
And to compound the trauma, Madame Foster makes a ruling that actively worsens Bloo's anxiety. She observes Mac caring for Cheese and declares that Cheese is now also a VIP.
He is immune from adoption, but only as long as Mac visits him every day at 3 p.m.
So now, the very mechanism that keeps Bloo safe from the 3 p.m. visit is a shared resource.
Bloo realizes that as long as Mac visits, he will have to share that precious sliver of time, that literal lifeline of validation, with this obnoxious chocolate milk guzzling nuke.
I mean, can you blame Bloo for losing his mind? Put yourself in that position. Your oxygen supply is suddenly cut in half.
And Bloo's reaction is to go to absolute cartoonish extreme that border on the criminal. He attempts to physically remove the threat to his existence.
He literally tries to mail him to another.
Wait, in a cardboard box?
Yeah, just slaps some stamps on him and tries to ship him off. When that fails, he takes Cheese to a retail store and tries to secretly sell him by hiding him in a bargain bin plush.
And when that fails, he resorts to imprisonment. He literally locks Cheese inside a dark closet at the mansion and leaves him there.
While it's framed within the narrative as comedic escalation, if you analyze the underlying motivation, it's deeply tragic.
How does a sentient being cope when their entire existence is tied to one human's fleeting attention span? They act out. They regress to primal survival tactics.
They do whatever it takes to ensure they are never ignored and that their primary source of life, creator's attention, is not compromised.
There's a twist ending to this ordeal. It turns out Mac didn't create Cheese at all. Cheese actually belongs to Mac's next-door neighbor, a girl named Louise.
Cheese was just accidentally conjured while Louise was standing near Mac, and he wandered into Mac's bed. So Cheese goes back to Louise, and Bloo gets a temporary.
But the damage to Bloo's underlying security is compounding. The possibility of replacement isn't just a paranoid fantasy anymore. It is a proven, tangible reality.
He knows Mac could wake up with a new friend tomorrow, and this desperate, gnawing need to never be ignored naturally escalate.
If Mac's 3 p.m. attention isn't enough to secure Blue's sense of self-worth against the vastness of the universe, Blue realizes he must start seeking validation from the outside world. He needs a bigger audience.
Which is a perfect segue into analyzing Blue's broader interaction society, the hunger for the spotlight and the illusion of control.
Because once you deeply internalize the idea that you are disposable to the people who are supposed to love you, you often try to make yourself essential, or at least famous to, as many strangers as possible.
So true. And we see this toxic dynamic play out perfectly in an encounter with a character known simply as New Guy. The episode is called Beat with a Shtick.
It starts with Blue engaging in some really ugly behavior. He is using the other weaker imaginary friends at Foster as the butt of his jokes.
He's roasting them to get cheap laughs from the crowd. He's feeding his ego by putting others down. And then he zeroes in on New Guy.
And New Guy is, by all accounts, not someone you want to provoke. He is described as gigantic, physically intimidating, and hailing from a notoriously dangerous, deranged, loony part of town.
His room at Foster's is literally decorated like a medieval torture chamber, but Blue, desperate for an audience and addicted to the cheap laughs, simply cannot help it.
He sees a target that will make him look tough. He starts mocking New Guy's height, throwing out terrible cliché insults like, "How's the weather up there?"
Blue is testing boundaries, trying to secure status in the house hierarchy by punching up. But New Guy doesn't take the bait the way Blue expects.
Instead of ignoring him or crying, New Guy turns around, stares Blue down, and formally challenges him. He tells Blue to meet him outside at exactly 4:00 p.m. and threatens that Blue is going to have funny all over his face.
So Blue spends the entire day absolutely riddled with anticipatory anxiety. He knows he's all bark and no bite. He is physically just a soft blob.
He is terrified of the brutal physical beating he is convinced he's about to take. He tries to dig a tunnel to escape. He tries to hide, but eventually 4 p.m. rolls.
The whole house gathers in the courtyard to watch the act. New Guy steps up, pulls out a massive, terrifying hammer, and looks down at...
He asks Blue a riddle. What's blue with red all over? And before Blue can even stammer out an answer, New Guy swings the hammer down with all his might.
Not on Blue, but on a watermelon sitting right next. The watermelon explodes, splashing red juice all over Blue's blue body.
The punchline is that New Guy wasn't planning to beat Blue up at all. He wasn't a violent monster. He just genuinely wanted Blue to teach him how to do physical comedy.
He saw Blue making people laugh earlier, and New Guy wanted to learn the craft of a setup and a punchline. He thought he was participating.
But I want to focus on Blue's reaction. The second the physical threat of the hammer is removed, does Blue feel remorse? Does he apologize for judging New Guy?
Does he experience humility? Absolutely not. The fear vanishes instantly, and the massive ego immediately reinflates.
He wipes the juice off his face and tells New Guy, completely deadpan, that his joke wasn't funny.
He learned absolutely nothing about humility or the consequences of his action. And we see this insatiable hunger for the spotlight reach its absolute, most toxic peak in a storyline titled Sweet Stench.
This is a narrative that really makes you question the fundamental morality of Blue's character.
It really does. It's a fascinating case study in extreme. The catalyst for this mess is Eduardo, the large, terrifying-looking but gentle purple monster.
Eduardo gets selected for a brief, tiny spot on the local community news in a segment called The Friday Friend. It's just a segment highlighting imaginary friends at Foster's who are up for adoption.
Eduardo goes on TV for 30 seconds, and Blue becomes unbelievably, uncontrollably jealous of this minor local television show.
Even though Frankie, the caretaker, tries to inject some logic into the situation, she reminds Blue, correctly, that he already has a kid. He has Mac. He has VIP status.
Why on earth would he want to go on a telethon segment specifically designed for orphans looking for a home?
But logic cannot penetrate Blue's narcissism. He simply cannot stand that someone else in his vicinity is getting public attention. So he hatches a truly reprehensible plan.
He goes down to the local news station and physically fakes a terminal illness, covers himself in spots, coughs weak, and pretends to be a dying, lonely, tragic imaginary friend whose only final wish is to just get a little bit of attention before he passes.
And it works entirely too well. The news station preempts their regular programming and runs an emergency, heart-wrenching broadcast trying to find someone, anyone, to help this poor, sick, dying creature.
When Blue returns to Foster's, dropping the act, everyone in the house is furious. They are disgusted.
But Blue defends it with zero shame, claiming it was just a strategic move for his acting career. It is an act of pure, unadulterated selfish.
I really want us to pause and think about this through a real-world lens. Think about what we are describing.
If a human being did this, if a person faked a terminal illness to get on the local news simply because they were jealous of a local orphan getting screen time, we would definitively, without hesitation, call them a sociopath.
It's essentially Munchausen, where someone fakes an illness for sympathy and attention, but weaponized and broadcast for TV ratings.
Here's where I want to debate this with you. Considering Bloo is an entity literally spun out of the ether by childhood imagination.
Is he actually sociopathic? Or is he just ruthlessly adapting his form to secure the attention he was biologically, fundamentally built to consume?
Right. If a plant turns its leaves aggressively toward the sun, blocking out another plant, we don't call the plant evil. We say it's surviving. Is Bloo just an emotional plant aggressively seeking the sun?
That is the core philosophical dilemma of his character, and it's a brilliant frame. He is a creature constructed of pure, unmitigated need.
But this insatiable sun-seeking need leads directly to his own downfall, because a slick Hollywood talent agent named Kip Snip happens to be watching that local news broadcast.
Kip sees the raw emotional manipulation Bloo is capable of, and he sees dollar sign. He drives to Foster's and offers Bloo a chance to be a rich, famous actor starring in a national commercial for a deodorant brand, Dio.
And Bloo is entirely blinded by the promise of fame. He sees the cameras, he hears the applause in his head, and he signs every single contract Kip Snip puts in front of him without reading a single word.
And for a brief, shining moment, he gets exactly what he thought he wanted. He becomes rich, he becomes famous, he gets the national spotlight.
But the cost of that spotlight is total, crushing isolation. He completely forgets about Mac. He forgets about his friends at Foster's.
When they try to visit him on set, he pawns them off because he genuinely believes too big time for the people who loved him when he was nothing.
But the reality of the fame machine is grueling and exploitative. Kip Snip doesn't care about Bloo's well-being. He sees Bloo purely as a literal cash cow.
Wheeling him out for endless promotional gigs, meet and greets, and exhausting shoots, the relentless schedule breaks Bloo's spirit.
He finally hits a wall, realizes the emptiness of his fame, and decides he wants to quit the commercial and go back to the simple life with his friend.
But when he tries to walk off the set, Kip Snip pulls out the paperwork and reveals the true, insidious nature of the contracts Bloo blindly signed. Kip Snip isn't just his agent. He is now Bloo's legal guardian.
Talk about a devastating irony. Think about the journey we just went on. Bloo has spent his entire existence absolutely terrified of being adopted by a stranger.
He fought tooth and nail against that spoiled rich girl in the pilot. He makes Max sprint across town every day at 3 p.m. to avoid it. He shattered a statue in terror over the thought of it.
But the exact second someone dangles fame and external validation in front of him, he willingly, eagerly signs himself over to a legal guardian.
His desire for external validation completely overrode his deepest, most primal survival instinct.
It's a stark commentary on the corrupting nature of fame, absolute. But on a deeper level, it highlights Bloo's fundamental lack of control over his own life.
He is constantly seeking agency in a world where, legally and physically, he has almost none. He is always at the mercy of a creator, a caretaker, or an...
And when he cannot find agency in the real world, his psychology adapts by retreating entirely into fantasy. We see this extensively in several episodes that take place entirely inside Bloo's own mind, featuring a heroic persona he created for himself called Bloo Super Dude.
I love the Super Dude segments. They are so revealing of how his brain works. In the Bloo Super Dude stories, Bloo imagines himself as this epic, muscular, flawless hero.
And it's fascinating how he casts the real people in his life in these fantasies. Mac, his creator, is literally referred to as the creator of everything.
Mr. Harriman, the authority figure he fears, becomes the evil villain. Lord Frankie, the caretaker, is either cast as a helpful fairy or a wicked villain named Frank, entirely dependent on whether she happens to be helping him or restricting.
Let's look at one specific story to see how he uses this to process guilt. In one fantasy, Super Dude is on a sweeping, epic quest for a magic crystal.
He is battling Lord Snooty, jumping over lava, and finally drops a magic potato off a roof to keep it out of the villain's hand. It feels like a standard fantasy.
But then the fantasy shatters, and the harsh reality intrudes. The narrative reveals that the magic crystal was actually Mac's expensive handheld gaming.
The epic battle was just Bloo accidentally breaking the toy and frantically trying to hide the evidence from Mr. Harriman.
In another story, Super Dude is locked in mortal combat with frankincense so he can attend a glorious ceremony.
But in reality, Bloo just has a highly contagious cold, he's sick in bed, and Frankie is simply trying to keep him quarantined so he doesn't infect the rest of the house during a party.
He literally hallucinates that his friend Eduardo is a magic potato and that he's shooting an infected biological weapon loogie at Wilt to escape his room.
It perfectly illustrates how Bloo uses grand, heroic narratives to cope with a reality where he is entirely powerless. He can't control the fact that he gets sick. He can't undo the fact that he carelessly broke his best friend.
Facing those realities requires accountability and vulnerability. So his brain protects his ego by rewriting the narrative so that he is the victor of circumstance, but ultimately the hero of the story.
Bloo's behavior, the raging narcissism, the retreat into fantasy, the desperate grabs for attention, it is all directly tied to his origin as a simple comfort object trying to survive in a complex world that outgrew him.
He is functioning exactly as his original programming dictates, just applied to inappropriate adult situations. But this brings up a fascinating pivot.
What happens to imaginary friends whose original design purpose wasn't just vague emotional comfort, but something much more physically demanding or deeply burdened?
And that question brings us into what I consider the most emotionally heavy, fascinating part of our deep dive today. We spent a lot of time on Bloo, but Foster's is filled with hundreds of other friends.
And by shifting our focus to the character studies of the other discarded residents, we start to see the unbearable, crushing weight of purpose in the verse. We're talking about characters who didn't just want a friend, they were built.
We are talking about the concept of biological determinism. Let's unpack that term first.
Biological determinism is the idea that your physical traits, your personality, and your behaviors are entirely unavoidably dictated by your genetics, or in the Foster, by the specific intention and psychological state of the child who dreams existence.
You can deviate from your programming, even if that programming destroys you. And the most tragic, clearest example of this in the entire series is undoubtedly Wilt.
Let's talk about Wilt. If you look at Wilt, he stands out immediately. He is incredibly tall, bright red, and physically severely damaged.
He looks like a basketball player mixed with a rag doll, but he's missing his left arm entirely, and his left eye is crushed and wonky.
But beyond his physical damage, his defining personality trait is that he is pathologically agreeable. He is extremely passive, unbelievably kind, and he physically, seemingly neurologic, cannot say the word no to anyone.
We get the full, devastating backstory of his condition in a dedicated movie special called Good Wilt Hunting. Wilt, it is revealed, was the imaginary friend of this universe's analog to Michael Jordan.
He was created by an intensely competitive kid named Jordan specifically to play basketball. Jordan's older brother was constantly beating him on the court, bullying him, so Jordan's mind imagined the ultimate trainer,
someone tall, athletic, and entirely dedicated to helping Jordan. So Wilt's entire purpose, woven into his literal DNA, is to be a supportive teammate, to assist, to ensure Jordan's victory and safety.
But then tragedy strikes on the court. There's an epic, high-stakes basketball game against Jordan's older brother and the brother's giant, physically imposing imaginary friend who is just named Larry.
During the climax of this intense game, there is a scramble for the ball. Jordan is on the ground, and Larry, this massive creature, is about to fall on top of him.
Jordan is about to be crushed and seriously injured. Wilt, fulfilling his deepest biological imperative to protect and assist his creator, throws himself into the fray.
He sacrifices his own body. He saves Jordan from the impact. But in the process, Wilt himself is crushed under Larry's weight. This violent moment is how he loses his arm and his eye.
But the physical trauma, the loss of limbs, isn't the real tragedy of Wilt's story. No, it's the psychological trauma that breaks him.
Because of the chaos of Wilt's sacrifice, Jordan's team lost the game. Wilt, in his own mind, failed the single task he was brought into the universe to perform. He didn't help Jordan win the game.
The guilt to that failure is so overwhelming, so toxic, that Wilt actually runs away. He leaves the hospital, he abandons his creator because he deeply feels that he is broken, defective, and unworthy of Jordan's love.
And this massive, unresolved guilt metastasizes over the years into his pathological inability to say no to anyone at Foster's. There's an episode that perfectly encapsulates this.
Wilt really genuinely wants to sit down and watch a live basketball game on TV. It's the one thing he loves. He sits on the couch.
But then Bloo asks him to go to the kitchen to get chips. Wilt says yes. On the way back, another friend asks a favor. Wilt says yes.
Then Mr. Harriman orders him to move heavy bags to the attic. Wilt says yes. He just keeps saying yes, growing more and moving more frantically until he misses the entire basketball game.
His extreme altruism isn't just organic kindness. It is a glitch in his programming caused by severe trauma. He is perpetually trying to make up for the one time he feels he failed his creator by vowing to never, ever fail anyone else ever again, even if it comes at the total cost of his own happiness and sanity.
It's just heartbreaking when you peel back. You think he's just a nice guy, but he's a trauma victim trapped in a loop. And the ending of Good Wilt Hunting brings this to a bittersweet.
Wilt finally reunites with Jordan, who is now a famous, incredibly wealthy, adult professional basketball. Jordan apologizes deeply, saying he looked everywhere for Wilt after the accident, that he never blamed.
Jordan offers Wilt a life of absolute fame and luck. He can live in a mansion, never work again, but Wilt refuses the offer.
He chooses to stay at Foster, telling Jordan that he feels he's more fit for some other little kid out there who actually he is fundamentally trapped in a cycle of service. He cannot accept rest.
Now let's contrast Wilt's outward damage with another primary resident whose damage is entirely internal, Eduardo.
If you look at Eduardo, he is a massive, terrifying purple monster. He has giant horns, sharp teeth, he wears a skull belt, and he speaks with a deep Latino accent. He looks like a demon from a nightmare.
But his personality is the exact opposite of his aesthetic. He is timid, incredibly gentle, and he is terrified of absolutely everything. A loud noise makes him cry. A small bug makes him faint.
Right. There are scenes where he won't even retrieve a plastic frisbee from the yard if it's sitting too close to a scary-looking cage. He just cries.
But when you look at his origin story, this bizarre paradox makes perfect psychological sense. Eduardo was created by a little girl, and Nina lived in a very dangerous, high-crime neighborhood.
She was constantly scared walking to school. She needed a protector. The psychology of his creation is brilliant. A frightened little girl needs something big and scary to keep the bad things away from her.
But because she is a child, she is projecting her own mind, her own essence to the creation. So her brain builds a terrifying exterior, the horn size, to scare off the external physical threat.
But the interior of the creature, his soul, is made entirely of her own raw fear. Eduardo is literally built out of a little girl's anxiety. He is a walking panic attack wrapped in a monster.
The only time he ever overcomes his crippling cowardice is when his friends are in imminent physical danger, because his core program, needed imperative to protect Nina, finally overrides blind terror.
We see that perfectly when Terrence tricks Eduardo into fighting in an underground extra Macharosaurus fighting ring. Eduardo is thrown into this pit, and he's terrified.
But the second he thinks his friends are going to be hurt, he transforms. He starts lifting cars and dominating these massive beasts purely on adrenaline and protective instinct.
But the exact second the threat is neutralized, he shrinks back down, grabs his teddy bear, and goes back to being a frightened child. His bravery is a reflex, not a personality trait.
And speaking of unchecked creation, we have to talk about Goo.
Goo represents a completely different kind of burden in the Foster's ecosystem. She is not an imaginary friend. She is a human girl, but she has a severe...
She becomes incredibly obsessed with Mac, and because her mind is wildly, uncontrollably imaginative and she speaks a mile a minute, she accidentally hyper-imagines new friends constantly.
She doesn't just make one friend. She invents friend after friend after friend, sometimes dozens in a single afternoon, just by rambling out loud.
And this leads to a literal housing crisis at Foster. Nobody at the mansion likes her because she is causing severe overcrowding. The infrastructure can't handle it.
They literally have to source imaginary friends to sleep outside on a converted bus because the mansion's bedrooms are completely full. Mac finally snaps under the pressure and yells at her to stop.
Which is a necessary, albeit harsh, boundary to set. But Goo's chaotic creation process is a perfect lens for understanding the sheer unsustainable volume world.
Every passing thought, every fleeting whim of a creative child instantly becomes a permanent, physical burden on the infrastructure of Foster's.
It's the perfect analogy for our modern world of impulsive digital content creation. Think about how we treat the internet. People just churn out content, creating photos, videos, massive files quickly for a momentary hit of dopamine or a few likes.
But they create all this data without ever considering long-term server space, the physical infrastructure, the massive cooling centers, or the mental energy required by moderators to support all that data indefinitely.
Goo is creating sentient beings just because she's bored and wants Mac to think she's cool, and she's leaving the exhausting physical cleanup to the caretakers. She takes no responsibility for the lives she creates.
And we can't forget Coco in this discussion of bizarre creation. Coco is a creature that looks like a hybrid between a bird, a palm tree, and an airplane.
She was discovered by nerdy scientists on an expedition. She can only speak her own name, saying Coco, Coco, Coco to communicate complex thoughts.
And her primary function is that she lays colorful plastic eggs that contain completely random, fully formed objects, from tools to sandwiches. She is the ultimate bizarre, hyper-specific manifestation of a complex imagination, completely unsuited for integration into a normal human house.
So I want you to picture the reality of this situation. If you take all these deeply traumatized, purpose-driven friends, Wilt with his crushing guilt, Eduardo with his baked-in terror, Goo's endless, chaotic creations demanding food and beds, and Coco laying plastic eggs all over the floor, and you shove them all into one single house, it places an impossible, crushing burden on the actual humans trying to light.
It begs the question, who is absorbing all this collateral damage?
Which leads us directly to examine the caretakers themselves and the rapid deterioration of the utopian facade. Foster's is pitched in the brochures as a magical haven, but the day-to-day reality of running it is an unrelenting, grinding nightmare of logistics and emotion.
Let's really break down the management trio. At the top, you have Madame Foster, the creator. She's an elderly woman, but she possesses a deeply mischievous, childlike, lighthearted demeanor. She loves to play pranks and have fun.
Then you have Mr. Harriman, the giant rabbit in a tuxedo. He is Madame Foster's own childhood imaginary friend, but he acts as the strict, rule-obsessed head of affair. And then you have Frankie, Madame Foster's red-headed, 20-something teenage granddaughter.
And Frankie is the fulcrum upon which the entire house balances. While Madame Foster plays games in the parlor and Mr. Harriman dictates rules from his desk, Frankie is the one actually doing the bone-breaking manual labor.
The dynamic is staggering. Frankie does literally everything. She cooks meals for hundreds of entities, she scrubs the massive floors, she manages psychological crises, she fixes the plumbing.
And her reward for keeping the house afloat is that she is constantly, relentlessly degraded by Mr. Harriman, who chastises her for the slightest perceived imperfection in her work.
Okay, I have to call this out right now because the hypocrisy of Mr. Harriman drives me crazy. Let's think about his position. He is an imaginary friend. He is a giant plush rabbit wearing a monocle and a tuxedo.
Yet he acts as the ultimate unforgiving enforcer of the human world's most rigid, stuffy, bureaucratic rules.
Why does the creation, the imaginary rabbit, enforce the rules more harshly than his actual creator, Madame Foster, who just wants to throw wild parties? It makes no sense.
Actually, psychologically, it makes perfect sense. It's classic institutional overcompensation. Harriman knows, deep down, that he is imaginary. He knows he is absurd.
So he adopts an extreme, uncompromising posture of order and protocol to validate his existence and maintain control over the chaos.
If he strictly enforces the rules, he is essential. If he lets go, he's just a stuffed rabbit. But his relentless pursuit of order completely breaks Frankie's spirit. We see the absolute climax of her caregiver burnout in the feature-length movie special, Destination Imagination.
This movie is such a brilliant exploration of burnout. So Frankie is completely exhausted. She is visibly drowning in chores, and Harriman's impossible.
One afternoon, a mysterious toy box arrives at the house with a very clear warning: do not open. Harriman specifically orders Frankie to leave it alone and get back to scrubbing the floor.
But her curiosity, and honestly her deep, desperate need for any kind of break from her miserable reality, gets the better of her. She pops the lid open, looks inside, and physically falls into the box.
She falls into an entirely new dimension, a pocket universe contained within the toy box, and what she finds there is heavily, specifically tailored to her deepest unmet desire.
She meets an imaginary, omnipresent entity known simply as World, and World places Frankie in a literal teenage girl's paradise. She is endlessly pampered.
She doesn't have to clean a single floor. She doesn't have to cook a single meal. For the very first time in her adult life, she's being served instead of serving everyone else.
And back in the real world, when she doesn't come back down for dinner, the gang realizes she's gone. Mac, Bloo, Wilt, Eduardo, they dive into the box to rescue her.
And they go on this wild, hallucinogenic journey. They are battling a fake Robin Hood in a forest. They deal with a manipulative, cute puppy who tricks them into eating sleep powder cookies. And they discover that this entity, World, is basically a god in this realm.
He can move between any faceless object to control it. Mac even tries a clever trick to trap World by leaving him as an apple in a pit of quicksand. But World just laughs and morphs into a wild horse. Pure, unrestrained imagination at its most powerful.
The visual spectacle is grand, but the emotional core of this story, the real gut punch, happens when they finally reach Frankie's castle. They burst through the doors, expecting her to be a terrified hostage begging for rescue.
Instead, they find Frankie lounging in luxury, and she absolutely refuses to leave with them. Yeah, she isn't brainwashed, fully loose, and she is doubly offended.
She looks at Bloo and Mac and correctly points out a devastating truth. They don't actually miss her. They don't care about her inner life or her happiness. They just miss the services she provides.
They only want her back so she can go back to cooking their dinners, washing their clothes, and scrubbing their...
It is a devastating, razor-sharp critique of the entire Foster's ecosystem. Madame Foster's utopian dream of creating a haven for discarded ideas relies entirely 100% on the indentured servitude and silent suffering of her own human grandeur.
Frankie's willingness to abandon her human reality entirely for a fake, isolating paradise in a box highlights just how unsustainable and exploitative the home's operational model is. The utopia is built on her broken back.
Eventually, the illusion of the box shatters. Mr. Harriman realizes what happened, dives in, and when he shows up and starts aggressively threatening World, it triggers a massive panic attack in the end.
World's anxiety causes the entire imaginary dimension to physically collapse into a terrifying white nothing. Frankie, showing her true colors as a caregiver, ultimately saves World from destruction, demands his release in the real all-go mansion.
But the resentment clearly linked. You can't just unsay what Frankie said. And we see the bizarre, boundaryless dynamics of the house play out again in how the characters treat Frankie in normal circumstances, specifically regarding romance.
You're referring to the episodes dealing with the crush dynamic.
Right.
There's a deeply uncomfortable but telling dynamic where Frankie has zero.
In one episode, Frankie gets a little kiss on the cheek from Mac after he helps her file some paperwork, and Mac suddenly falls head over heels in pubescent love with her.
Bloo also develops a massive crush when he sees her dressed up nicely to go to a rock concert. But it peaks when Frankie actually tries to have a normal human life and goes on a date with a guy named Dill.
Mac and Blue are so jealous that they actually team up with an imaginary friend named Prince Charming. They stage a fake date at the exact same restaurant, sitting right next to Frankie and Dylan, just to eavesdrop, throw food, and actively sabotage Frankie's evening.
It's comedically framed as wacky hijinks, but it underscores the profound boundary issues inherent in the house. Frankie is their caretaker, their maternal figure, their maid, their warden, and the object of their pubescent infatuation.
She has absolutely no space of her own. Her desire to escape into a toy box in destination imagination wasn't just a whim. It was an entirely justified psychological response to an environment that consumes her entirely.
But here's the tragic flip side. While Frankie's desire to escape is temporary, she eventually accepts her role. For the imaginary friends themselves, the threat of being forced to leave, or worse, watching their best friends be forced, is a constant, lingering shadow that haunts every single.
Which brings us to the most difficult aspect of life at Foster, the illusion of forever, and how these characters process profound grief and impermanence.
The show outlines several events that really drive home how terrifying the adoption process is from the perspective of the friend. The most glaring example is an event called Adopt a Thought Saturday.
On the surface, if you are a human looking at a flyer, Adopt a Thought Saturday is pitched as a joyous celebratory occasion. It's a grand open house focused on getting these wonderful friends adopted into new, loving forever homes. There are balloons, there's music.
But to the residents of Foster's who actually live there, it is essentially a mass funeral.
Exactly. Think about how you would feel.
Mac and Blue are sitting on the stairs watching the event, and they see one of their favorite friends, a guy named Jokey the Clown, get adopted. A family smiles, takes his hand, and walks him out the front.
And the realization hits Mac and Blue like a freight train. Jokey is gone forever. To them, adoption means a friend vanishes into the void and never, ever comes back.
They're so horrified by this concept that they actively try to sabotage the entire event. They run around the mansion frantically trying to physically shove all the imaginary friends back inside closets and behind doors to hide them from the prospective parent.
Wilt catches them doing this and reprimands them severely. He calls them selfish for actively denying these friends a chance at a real home and a loving kid.
But logic doesn't work on terror. When a literal school bus full of energetic children pulls up to the gates, even Blue's baseline panic takes. He resorts to distracting the entire crowd of kids by jumping on a table, doing silly dances, and making loud. He ensures the kids only pay attention to him. Knowing his VIP status means he can't be adopted, so that his friends will be ignored and won't.
It is a genuinely noble act hidden inside a deeply obnoxious performance. It's like living in a college dorm, or maybe a transient hotel or a refugee camp. You are placed in this intense pressure cooker of an environment.
You sleep next to people, you eat with them, you survive with them, you form these incredibly life-altering bonds. But the inherent design of the institution guarantees your eventual.
From the exact moment you meet them and say hello, that one day they will pack their bags and you will likely never see them again. The psychological toll of that enforced transience is immense. It breeds an inability to trust the future.
And we see them try to grapple with belief and permanence in other ways, such as the Christmas episode. Oh, this episode is beautiful. It actually won an Emmy for Best Design. The premise is fascinating and uniquely suited.
Mac, despite being 8 years old, stops believing in Santa Claus. Why? Because in a world where kids' imaginations instantly manifest physical reality, every time a kid anywhere gets too excited about Christmas, they accidentally imagine a fake Santa.
So Foster's is overrun with dozens of imaginary, slightly off-brand Santas roaming the hall. It breaks Mac's faith completely. He sees the ancient magic of Christmas reduced to a cheap symptom of hyperactive biological determination.
The real Santa is obscured by the noise of the fake. Blue, typically, uses this existential crisis for extortion. He dresses up as the ghosts from A Christmas Carol, though he hilariously misidentifies Jacob Marley as the reggae singer Bob Marley to try and terrify Mr. Harriman into giving them extra expensive gifts.
Which completely backfires, and Harriman gets so annoyed he just cancels Christmas. But the resolution of the episode is what matters to our discussion of permanence. On Christmas morning, Mac doesn't find his gifts.
He trudges over to Foster's, and Madame Foster hands him a single stocking. He opens it, and it's full of plain white underwear, which sounds like a terrible gag gift until you realize the context.
Mac secretly wished for underwear at his own house, whispering it out loud in his bedroom where absolutely no one from Foster's could have possibly heard him. Receiving that specific gift proves to Mac that the real Santa exists, completely separate from the imaginary manifestations cluttering the hall.
It's a desperately needed injection of true, permanent magic in a world filled with temporary, fleeting illusion. But the most profound, devastating exploration of grief and loss in the entire series comes when the thread of separation finally hits the core group. It comes when Eduardo is adopted.
Oh, this sequence of events is just an emotional roller coaster. Let's walk through it. So the unthinkable happens. Eduardo, the terrified monster, actually gets adopted by a family. He packs his bags, he cries, and
Blue, who we know is fundamentally terrified of abandonment, completely shuts down emotion. He refuses to admit he's sad. He won't shed a single tear. He resorts to corporate jargon to distance himself from the raw pain.
When Frankie asks him how he's feeling, he claims he doesn't miss Eduardo at all. He just hates how his departure negatively changes the friend group dynamic.
The friend group dynamic. Listen to that. He is using human resources language to build an impenetrable wall around his raw, bleeding heart. But the rest of the gang has a coping mechanism to deal with the loss.
They gather around and read letters from friends who have been adopted out into the real world to prove that there is life after foster. For instance, they read a series of letters from a bizarre friend named Blobby Pants, who is apparently miserable and trying out a bunch of random human life. The letters say he's trying to be a rodeo clown, a chef, and he even joined a college frat.
It's meant to be comforting, but then they receive a letter from Eduardo, and it is terrifying. Eduardo writes that his new family took him on a trip to the woods to look for a real-life unicorn for his new child. But while in the woods, he was cornered by hunters.
The letter details, in his childlike handwriting, that these woodsmen are pursuing him with weapons, treating him as a hefty, monstrous prize. The entire house goes into panic mode. They gear up for a full-scale rescue mission to save him.
But right before they can leave the mansion, they get one final piece of mail. It's written on a piece of tree bark. Someone reads it out loud to the group, and the phrasing implies Eduardo has been shot by the hunters.
And this is the moment Bloo's corporate HR wall completely, utterly shatters. He rips off his jacket, collapses to the floor, and just starts sobbing uncontrollably in front of everyone. The brutal reality of permanent loss finally penetrates his carefully constructed defense.
And then pure chaos erupts. While Bloo is crying, a massive, heavy-duty semi-truck comes crashing violently right through the front gates and into the side of the Foster's mansion. The doors swing open, and who is the driver? It's Blobby.
Blobby Pants stole an 18-wheeler semi-truck, and he used it to drive around the outside world and literally rescue every single imaginary friend who had been adopted over the last few months, kidnapping them back from their human families and bringing them to the mansion, including Eduardo, who steps out of the back of the truck.
It is a violent, radical, illegal rejection of the core purpose of the house. Madame Foster's stated goal is to integrate these friends into new homes in the real human world. Blobby Pants stealing a truck to bring everyone back to the orphanage is a massive physical manifestation of the trauma of separation.
He is making a definitive statement. Real world is too harsh, humans are too cruel, and the only truly safe place for us is inside. And it turns out the tragedy was a misunderstanding. Eduardo wasn't even shot with a gun. He was shot with a telephoto lens by an overeager nature photographer.
But the fear they felt was real. The grief was real. And this massive trauma, this constant, exhausting cycle of fighting adoption, avoiding separation, and Bloo acting selfishly just to keep his fragile little world intact, all builds up, compounds over 5 seasons, leading directly to the ultimate test of his character.
Which brings us to the culmination of Bloo's entire psychological journey, the series finale. The setup for the finale is exact nightmare Bloo has been dreading since episode 1. Mr. Harriman calls a solemn house meeting and announces the devastating Mac is moving away, leaving the city.
For 5 seasons, we have watched Bloo react to any minor threat to his relationship with Mac with extreme, selfish, often destructive behavior. He shattered statues. He mailed cheese in a box. He faked illnesses. He orchestrated elaborate hoax. Given his history, the expected reaction here would be a catastrophic, violent meltdown.
Exactly. You'd expect him to chain himself to Mac's leg or try to blow up the moving truck or kidnap Mac and hide him in the wall. But instead, he does. Bloo looks at Mac, takes a deep breath, and decides for the very first time in his entire existence to be completely and entirely self. He gathers the rest of the imaginary friends in secret, and he plans the ultimate, perfect final day for Mac.
And we must recognize that this final day requires immense, painful sacrifice on Bloo's part, because the things Mac loves to do are decidedly not the things Bloo loves to do.
Right. Mac wants a quiet, sentimental day. He wants to spend his final hours sitting in the parlor, eating Madame Foster's special cookie, getting a slow portrait painted by Coco, and playing a long, exhaustive game of basketball with Wilt. Bloo's an adrenaline junkie. He hates sitting still. He's incredibly bored during all of this. He hates every second.
But he endures it. He sits quietly on the bench. He waits his turn, suppressing every single narcissistic, attention-seeking urge in his little blue body, just to ensure that his best friend is happy and peaceful.
This is profound, staggering character growth. It proves that the wonderful habitation of Foster, despite all its flaws, its staggering caregiver burnout, its hypocritical rules, and its underlying sadness actually accomplishes true purpose.
It took an insecure, deeply traumatized creation whose only instinct was toxic self-preservation, and it taught him how to love someone else more than he loves himself. He is willing to suffer in absolute silence, just to give Mac a good goodbye.
It's beautiful. It really brings a tear to your eye. Until Bloo's patience finally runs out at the very end of the day. The sun is setting, he decides it's finally his turn to pick an activity, and he comes up with the ultimate cool idea. He and Mac are going to put on leather jackets and literally jump over a pool of sharks on a...
But just as they are revving the engine and about to do it, Frankie swoops in out of nowhere, grabs Mac, and steals him away to a massive, loud surprise going-away party in the dining room.
Bloo is pushed to his absolute psychology. He's been patient all day, he's been selfless, he has grown as a person, and his one final desperate request to bond with his creator is thwarted by a party. Frustrated, heartbroken, he finally snaps. He storms into the party, points at Mac, and yells, "Goodbye forever, you big jerk!"
Which prompts the massive twist of the finale. The music stops. Mac looks at Bloo, utterly confused. He explains the misunderstanding. Mac isn't moving away to another state. He isn't leaving the city. His mom just got a promotion and needed a bigger home office, so they're moving to a different apartment in the exact same apartment complex. He's literally just moving one door down.
All of the intense grief, all of the dramatic final day planning, the incredible, painful character growth, it was all based on a simple miscommunication. But the writers of the show don't let them off the hook quite that easily. The universe of Foster's demands a comedic and cosmic balance.
Oh, the ultimate irony of the ending. It's so good. Mac explains that they are moving into a specific unit. They are moving into the old apartment of his next-door neighbor, Louise. And Louise's family is moving to a brand new building across town. But there is a catch. Louise's new building has a very strict, legally binding, no pets or imaginary friends policy.
Which means, according to the rules of this universe, Louise's imaginary friend can no longer live with her. And because she is moving, that friend must now move into Foster's permanently as a full-time, unadoptable resident.
And who, you might ask, is Louise's imaginary friend? It's Chi, the dim-witted, lactose-intolerant, chocolate milk-demanding nightmare that Bloo once locked in a closet. The entire series ends with Cheese arriving at the front door of the mansion with his bag, screaming, "I like chocolate milk!" And the entire house, Bloo, Mac, Frankie, Harriman, screaming in absolute horror as the camera pans out and the credits roll.
It is a hilarious punchline to end a cartoon, certainly. But if we look deeper, it solidifies a core, undeniable truth of this universe and of human psychology. You never truly get rid of your baggage. The things we create, the coping mechanisms we spin out of control, the annoying parts of our past, they never really disappear. They just get shuffled around the board. Cheese is the past coming back to live with them permanently.
It brings us full circle right back to the core premise we started with at the top of the show. We as humans create things to cope with the hard, terrifying parts of growing up. And eventually, we have to learn how to exist alongside those coping mechanisms, rather than just throwing them in a dark closet or dropping them off in an orphanage and pretending they don't exist.
We must integrate our past selves, our childish fears, and our absurd, sometimes annoying creations into our adult life. Because if we don't, they will simply stand at the front door and scream until we are forced to let them in.
Wonderful. To recap this incredible emotional journey we've been on today, we started by examining the deeply tragic premise of childhood abandonment. We broke down the immense, daily, suffocating pressure of the 3 p.m. rule that shaped an 8-year-old boy's life. We dissected the psychological defense mechanisms of Bloo, seeing how extreme fear and disposability bred a hilarious but deeply sad brand of narcissism.
We looked at the heavy, inescapable burdens of purpose carried by characters like Wilt, who physically couldn't say no due to trauma, and Eduardo, whose scary exterior hid a little girl's profound. We exposed the crushing caregiver burnout of Frankie, revealing the exploitative cracks in Madame Facade. And finally, we witnessed the beautiful, selfless growth of Bloo in the face of letting, only to be rewarded with the eternal screaming torment.
It is a rich, surprisingly profound text, truly example. And before we close out our deep dive today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a brand new concept upon something to chew on that recontextualizes everything. Scott, what if the real Foster physical Victorian mansion at all? What if Foster's is actually a metaphor, adult brain? Think about it. Every imaginary friend, every past belief you held tight, every childish hope, and every childhood coping mechanism you have ever outgrown hasn't actually been discarded. They didn't vanish when you turned 18. They're all still living inside your head, wandering the labyrinthine halls of your... They're waiting for you to come back and visit them every day at 3.
Wow. That is I want you to ask yourself, what forgotten part of your own child waiting in the park are they just asking? We want to thank you so much for joining us, Dive. Keep exploring the incredible psychology hiding, and never forget to up. Until next